Hello friends, welcome to Technogeek SFDC. So in this series we are going to see what is integration in Salesforce. So there will be a lot of topics which we will be covering in this series, that is how you can do callout from Salesforce, how you can use the standard REST APIs and do the SOQL queries in the callouts, what is composite API, custom REST API and name credentials. So we'll try to cover each and every topic of the integration which we use in our day-to-day work in Salesforce. Okay. So before we start, let's try to understand why integration is required. Okay. So any large organization and even a smaller organizations as well, right? They have their data scattered across different systems. So for example, hiring process will be on one system, your claims will be on one system, or your incident management will be on another system. But how you can combine all this data together so that you can run your business efficiently? Okay, or any company, they can run their business efficiently. So that's where integration comes into picture, where you are taking the data from one system, also sending the data to that particular system. Okay, so basic definition of integration is the connection between two systems. Okay, and when we say connection between two systems, here two terminologies are there which we use very frequently. One is your provider and one is your consumer. So provider is that system which is giving out the information, and consumer is that system which is taking that information. Okay, now first thing is how integration work, usually on a high level how integration work. So as I said, we have, let's say we have two servers. One is your consumer. Okay, so what consumer do? Okay, so before consumer start consuming it, your provider or the system which is giving out the information, they gives an endpoint. Okay, so they basically gives an address where any consumer can use that particular address to get the data. Okay, so let's say you have a provider. Okay, provider has given an endpoint and your consumer will first hit that endpoint. Okay, so let's say your Salesforce is a consumer and your SAP system is a provider. Okay, so SAP system will be giving some endpoint and Salesforce will hit that endpoint first. Okay, as soon as Salesforce will hit that endpoint, there has to be an authorization happening in the backend. Okay, because it's not like you're making your data public, right? So basically, any consumer who is hitting the provider endpoint, provider will first check that whether that consumer part or consumer system is even authorized to see my data. Okay, so that's where your authorization process happens in the provider part first, that checking that whether I should give this data to the system or not. Okay, once the system the provider system basically authenticates that, okay, yeah, this system is the consumer system is a valid system and they have the permission to use our data, then the provider system will return the data in the form of HTTP response to the consumer system. So this is a whole and soul process or on a very high level how your integration works using the HTTP request in any system, not only in Salesforce but in any system where your consumer hits the endpoint. Provide the endpoint provider will be first doing an authorization, checking that, okay, this particular consumer is a legit consumer or not, and then after authorization, provider will give the data. So I hope till here it is clear on a high level what is integration, why we need integration, and how the integration happens on an overall basis. Okay. Now, when we talk about integration, we basically use the web services. Okay. So in any system, there are two types of web services. Let's say if you talk specifically about the Salesforce. So in Salesforce, we have two types of web services. One is your REST web service and one is your SOAP web service. So what a REST web service are? Okay, so REST web service is basically an architectural style for designing a networked applications. Okay, so these types of web services are basically used where we have to develop the APIs. Okay, or where we have to do or where we have to expose the data via APIs. That's where your REST web services are being used. APIs are nothing but your application programming interface. Okay, And nowadays, REST web services are very much in demand. The reason is that it is easy to set up. Your REST web services are very much lighter in weight and it is faster in processing. Okay, that's why REST web services are very much in demand nowadays. If you know REST web service, you are very good to clear any kind of integration interviews as well. Okay, similarly, you have a SOAP web service. Okay, so SOAP web service is again it's a protocol for exchanging information between the system in a structured way. So the structure which we use in SOAP web service is XML, whereas in REST it is JSON and XML format. Okay, SOAP web service is an older mechanism of doing the integration or older mechanism of data exchange between the two systems, and this only supports XML. Okay, but what is the advantage of SOAP over REST? Okay, so in terms of security, let's say if you have to build an integration which is very much highly secured, in that cases SOAP is always having an upper hand in comparison to REST. In REST also you can put the securities, but the SOAP web service securities are always having upper hand in terms of REST web services. And also SOAP only supports your XML format, whereas your REST web service supports JSON as well as XML. And why it is lightweight? Because your JSON is a lightweight carrier. Okay, so that's where your REST web service are faster in processing. Whereas SOAP is only supporting XML, that's where you can find the speed difference you will see in comparison to REST. That is, SOAP is little bit slow in terms of REST service. Okay, now in this series we will initially talk about the REST services. Okay, we'll try to cover all the REST services and then we will move towards the SOAP as well. Okay, so when we use an REST service, okay, or REST callout, there are basically three major classes which will be used in your REST services. One is your HTTP, okay, which is basically your carrier. Second is a HTTP request. So HTTP request is that particular class which will be carrying the information, the required information to retrieve a data. So let's say you have a consumer system. Again, we'll go back to our previous model. So for example, if I take this example, okay, so here my HTTP request, so basically your provider will need some kind of input to give the required data, right? So HTTP request will carry that information. For example, let's say if you have to get all the data whose name is starting with test. Let's take this example, okay? So what consumer do? Consumer basically sends an HTTP request stating the information that I need all the data whose name is starting with test, along with certain additional parameters to do the authorization. Okay, provider will accept this HTTP request, it will process on that, and then whatever response or whatever the outcome happens because of this processing, that outcome will be stored in HTTP response and it will be sent back to the consumer. Okay, so that's where here we have three major classes which are being used: HTTP, HTTP request, and HTTP response. So the request will contain the information using which the other system will give the data, and the data which will be sent by the provider system will come in the form of HTTP response. Okay, and HTTP is your whole and sole carrier of your HTTP request and response. Okay, so these are the major classes which will be used in any REST web services. Now, there are certain types of requests when you do a call out, right? When you do a HTTP or call out or a REST call out, there are certain types of requests. Like what type of request you're doing, what is your intention behind that call out? Okay, so first type is get. Okay, so in this request type, you are telling the provider that I just need some information from your system. So let's say Salesforce is a consumer and SAP is a provider. So Salesforce will tell SAP that I only need certain information. I want to get the information from your system. Okay. Next is your post. Post is basically used to create the data in the provider system. Okay. So you have this feasibility as well that from Salesforce, you can create some information or you can create some record in SAP system. Okay. So that's where your post request comes in, where you are telling a system that I have this resources using this resource, I want to create a data in your system. Okay, and that's where you will create a data in provider system from your consumer. Okay, so that's where your post request comes into picture, where you want to create certain record in the provider system. Third is your delete. So let's say you get some information, or let's say you get some requirement that consumer system, let's say Salesforce, needs to delete certain data from SAP system. So that's where your HTTP request will specify that I want to do a delete operation on your system. Okay, that's where your delete request type is used. And last is your put. So put is basically used, it's a kind of absurd statement where put will be telling the system that I have this information. Okay, based on this information, either you create a new record or you need to update an existing record. So for example, let's say you are giving that I have certain information with name as test. So this information you check in your system that whether you need to create a record, or if you already have a record with name as test, then update that record. Okay, so that's where your put request types comes into picture. So on an average, on a overview, we have four types. One is get. Get is basically you're telling provider that I need some data from you. Post is telling the provider that okay, I need to create some data in you. Delete is basically that I need to delete the data, and put is basically kind of absurd statement for the provider. Okay, so these are the four basic types of request which we do in the HTTP callouts, or basically in the REST callouts. Okay, now this is all theoretical till now. Now let's see how you can do a call out to a public API. So on a high level, if I tell, public APIs are basically those servers which are being designed to be used by public. Okay, so in this, your authentication or authorization process is very minimal, and you can use the data from public API. So we will see how you can basically do the call out from Salesforce to retrieve the data or to create a data. Okay, so in our demo today, the public API which we are going to use, the website which provides the public API we will be using is GoRest. So GoRest provides a lot of endpoints where you can do your hands-on, or you can do your testing to get more confidence in how the integrations and all help work. Okay, so this is a free website where you can easily log in. If you want, you can log in with your GitHub, or you can log in with your Google or Microsoft accounts. So I'll log in with my Google. So as soon as you click on this, it will create a user for you, and then it will take you to the console page. Okay. So if one thing what you're seeing here is access token. So as I said, it's a public API, so authorization is very minimal here. Okay. But in this case also, you need something to tell system that I am a legit user, I am a authorized user to get your data, right? That's where we are using this access token. So this website, basically GoRest, will provide you a long token which you can use to do the call out to the website. Okay, now these websites provides you a lot of endpoints. uh, so for example, this, so let's say we will be working on the user's endpoint. Okay, so this is one endpoint which this website provides, where you can use the endpoints to do the get callout. So for example, if you want to get the information about any user, you can use the get callout. If you want to delete any information about the user, you can use the delete callout. Similarly, you have post, where if you want to insert the information about any user. Okay, so let's see how we are going to use this website to do the testing from our Salesforce org. So for this, I'll go to first my developer console, and I'll create a new class here. So I'll put integration demo, and I'll put okay. So this has created a class for me, like public class integration demo. Okay. Now what I'll do, I'll use public static void. I don't need any kind of response. I'm just keeping it as a void. Now I'll use test integration. Okay, so this is my class, and this is my method name here. Okay, and in this I will be passing one string. Basically it will be the ID of the user about whom I want to get the information. Okay, so I'll use something like user ID here. Now the main thing starts from here. So as I said, we have three major classes which we will be using in any kind of REST callouts. Okay, so first is our HTTP class. Okay, so we'll create one HTTP instance, new HTTP. Okay, next is my request class. Okay, so I'll use HTTP request. I'll just give the name as rec equals new HTTP request. Okay, I'll just keep this as well small to be consistent. Now, this we have created the instance of our request class, but now we have to fill in information in this REST class, a REST method, where which will be carried by using the HTTP to the end server, stating that we need these informations, right? So first thing what we need to do is we need to set the header. Okay, so in header we need to provide the authorization. Okay, which will be followed by bearer and the token which I got from my account. Okay, so I'll just use this. So this particular header, this header will be having the authorization as a keyword. So the other system, the provider system, will use this header to find out whether I'm a legit user or not. So whatever the token I have provided here, it will check in the system. The provider will check in their system that whether this key is a valid key or not. Okay, if it is a valid key, then system will tell, okay, this particular user who has hit the endpoint is authorized to use our data. Okay, next what we'll do, we'll use dot set endpoint. Okay, so you have put for the authorization, but you also need to put for the endpoint, right? Which address you are going to hit or which server you are going to hit to get the data, right? So that's where we will be using the endpoint here. Okay, and for endpoint we will be using, so our complete endpoint will become https followed by go rest.co.in and then this. Now, one more parameter we need to add here because it's a get type, right? So the another parameter which we need to add here is the user ID which we will be passing to the server, stating that okay, for this particular user ID I need the information. Okay, so that's where I'll be using this attribute which I will pass in the method. Okay, now this has created a complete endpoint and set it to the request, stating that this request has to go to this endpoint. So I'm basically hitting this server to get the information. Okay, so now we have put for the authorization, we have put the endpoint, but now we also have to specify that uh, what type of callout it is, whether it's a get, whether it's a post, whether it's a delete. So what type of callout it is going to be. So for that we use something called set method. So request.set method, here we will define that it is going to be a get request, because I only need to get the data from the system. I don't need to perform any operation on the provider system. I just need to get the data, right? So that's where we will be setting the method as get. Okay. Now, so we have set the basic required parameters here. Now we will use our HTTP carrier to send the request. Okay, so this statement is telling that your HTTP carrier will use the request parameter now, and the return type will always be HTTP response. HTTP response. I'll just give as RESP equals this. Okay, so now we are sending the data to the endpoint, and in return we will get the expected result in the form of HTTP response. Okay, now next thing is we will we'll just put some debug logs here, system.debug, to check what is the response. Okay. So first thing what we usually check is response status. So status is a integer number which any server returns to you stating that what happened to that request. Okay. So there can be multiple scenarios. Maybe your request is not a valid request, or request has been processed successfully, or the server which you're trying to hit, that server is only not available. So there are different integers provided based on what is the final outcome of the request. Okay. So if your request is processed successfully, then usually the response which we get is either 200, 201, or 204. Okay. So let's see how we can dot get status. Okay. So get status method gives you the what is the current status of the request. Okay, basically it will give you a status code. Just one correction here, it's not status, it's status code. Yeah, so we'll be using the get status code. Okay, and next we will put what is the body we have received. So basically what is the response, whatever the final processed response will be there, right, that will be stored in the body of HTTP response. Okay, so for that we will put response check, and we will use resp dot get body. Okay, this body usually are in the form of JSON format. So once you receive this body, you can parse and you can use it in your further processings. Okay, now let's save this. So before we do this call out, let's see what is the expected outcome we should be getting. Okay, so let's say if I go to REST console of the Go REST, and if I try to put 1711, okay, so my status is 200. This means it is processed successfully, and and there is a record with this particular ID named as Vaishno Achari. Okay, so the same output we should expect in our system as well. Like when we will do the call out from here, we have to we should expect the same outcome in the Apex as well. Okay, so we have done all the everything, classes and all we have put, and we have set HTTP request response, we have put it here. But one major thing, or one most important thing, is remote site setting. So whenever you do any external call out, okay, let's say whenever you're doing a call out to any third party, any URL which is out of Salesforce, so you need to tell your Salesforce server that I am going to do call out to this particular endpoint. Okay, and how you tell that? So basically, for stating that, we create a remote site setting. Okay, so for creating a remote site setting, you can just type in the quick find remote site settings, click on new remote site, and you can give the site name as demo URL. You can give the URL here. Okay, and then you can mark it as active. So this means you are telling the Salesforce that this is an active, so this is an endpoint which I'm going to use in my callouts. Okay, and then you can click on save. So as soon as you click on save, it basically truncate your complete URL, and only takes the main domain URL, that is our gorest.co.in. Okay, so now we have created a remote site setting here. Now let's try to execute this from our anonymous window, and let's see how this behaves. Okay, so I'll take this integration demo dot, and I will pass here 1711, which we saw in our Go REST console, and we will execute this. So let's see what response we have received. So as you can see, the response we have received is 200, and response check, you can see I have received all the information properly here. Okay, so this is how you can do a get. So in this callout, what we have done, we have told the system that I need an information about the resource whose ID is 1711. Okay. Now, this we have seen for the get. Now, let's say if I have to create a record. Okay. So for creation of the record, we will be using post here. Okay. Post. And let's see what is the endpoint for creation. So for post method, it is just users. Okay. So for post, your endpoint is only users. And one more thing to mention here, that whenever you're doing a post method, you need to set the body here. Okay, body, it can be in that form of JSON or it can be XML. Usually we use JSON format, but you have to create a body here, which you will be sending in the request, so that you are stating the system that this is the body which you need to process in the provider system, or the provider system has to capture this body and process it. Okay, and all the information you will provide in the body. Okay, so I'll just keep a normal string request body, and we can also see what type of JSON format it is expecting. So for create user, uh, just a second, I'm just checking. Okay, so for create user, you need a body something like this. Okay, now we will use that body with some alteration, and we will use it in our post request. Okay, so let's say I'm giving some updates here. Let's say I'm giving Alok Kumar, email as test123.com, and status I'm giving it as active. So this is a static string I have created. You can create this string dynamically as well, like if you are passing here, or let me just do one thing. I'll just pass it dynamically. Okay, so I'll keep something like user name and then string user email. So these two I will pass, and it should create the record. Okay, so I'm passing username here, and I'm passing email here. I'll pass the email. Okay, now, so this is what we have done here. We are using the post method with the request body, and now we will set this body to our HTTP request. Okay, and after that, again the same process. We will do the send method, and we will do a call out, and we will see what is the response coming in. So now let me again open this, and here I will pass my first parameter as, let's say, Alok Kumar, and I'll give Alok dot Kumar at the rate test123.com. Okay, now let's execute this once again, and we'll see what is the outcome. So, okay, so what it is telling, email message cannot be blank. Okay, field name cannot be, can be male or female status. Okay, okay. So I need, so this is what you're getting, because it is giving a 422 response. It is telling that some required informations are missing in the request. Okay, so let's go back and see what is missing here. So I have given email, that is my user email here, followed by status, and also we need, as per the request what we are seeing in the document, we also need a gender. So I'll just keep a static gender as gender followed by male. Okay, and we'll just put a debug to check what is the request we are sending. Okay, we'll save this, and then let's try to run this again. So we have this. Hello. Kumar 2, okay, at the rate it will be, because your emails are usually should have at the rate, right? So we are keeping at the rate test.com. And now let's try to execute. Now if I open the debug log, okay, so what it is telling again, I have gender male, status active. It is telling field email message can't be blank. Okay, so I have email field, and then it is still telling that there is some error. So we'll just recheck what is the issue in this. So one thing what we were missing here is two additional headers. So whenever you do the post request, you need to provide the two additional headers as well, that is accept and content type, so that you can specify what is the format of your body. Okay, because as you know, REST supports your XML as well as JSON. So in our case, it is JSON. That's why we have to put the content type as application slash JSON, so that this will tell the server, the other provider server, that I am sending a request in the form of JSON format. Okay, now let's try to execute this and we'll see what the outcome is. Demo 2. I'll put a demo 2 Kumar 1991 and let's try to execute what happens. See, now what it is telling, that okay, the response status is 201. This means my process is is executed successfully, and in return it has given me the response with this particular ID. So this is the ID, or this is the identifier in the provider system for me. So now if I use a GET request with this ID, I should be able to retrieve the information which I had just recently created. Okay, so let me just put this. I'll just comment out this for now. I'll mark it as get, and then I'll just comment this thing. Okay, this also I'll comment. I don't need this, and this also I will comment. So now let's see. This is the newly created user. So let's try to execute, and we will see what is the outcome. I didn't save it. Okay, I didn't save it. Sorry. Now let me execute this. So now if you can see, I am able to successfully retrieve the user which I just created with my post method. So this is the example of post method where you can create some records in the provider system. Okay. Now, next thing what we are going to do is we are going to see the delete. Okay. So delete is similar to your get request, where you will be passing the ID, you're setting the method as delete, so that it will tell the system that I want to delete this record. Okay, and we will see what the outcome is going to be. And let's try to execute. See, so it is telling that response status is 204. This means that my request has been successfully completed. Now let's see whether it got deleted successfully or not. So if it is deleted successfully, if I try to retrieve with this ID, it should not give me the resource, right? Because it is already deleted from their system. So let me just execute this once again. And see, now the message is coming as resource not found. Okay. So this is how you can do a call out from Salesforce to an to a public API, which I have used here as a GoRest. Okay, so GoRest is my public API. Even you can use it, and you can also get a token and do the initial hands-on on it. Okay, so with this, we will wrap up today's video. I try to explain how you can do the call out with the public API. In the next session, we will see more in depth about the other topics in the integration in Salesforce, like composite APIs and others. So we will try to cover everything in this series. So with this, we will wrap up today's video. I hope you liked it. Any queries, any questions, you can just put it in the comment and we will definitely try to answer on that. And wait for the other demos. Keep stayed in the channel and we will come up with more videos on this. So with this, thanks for your time. Bye bye.